Hello, I'm Dr. Maury Markman from City of Hope. And in this final segment of this particular topic, where I've discussed several issues related to both the quality of published data and interpretation of peer-reviewed literature regarding the nausea and vomiting and other toxicities in the peer-reviewed literature, and the status of our existing trial toxicity criteria, particularly as relates to the major changes in the drugs employed, how they're delivered, and duration of therapy. I would like to complete this discussion with a few comments on what might be considered in the future to try to improve the situation that I highlighted in the previous sections. First, when the question comes of the reporting of toxicity, one very reasonable suggestion would be that oncology and general medical journals that plan to publish such trials mandate, and I repeat the term mandate, no consideration will be given for publication unless these particular articles include very specific, well-defined data that are complete regarding the toxicity experienced or measured in the trials. Again, this has been outlined by others, will include all serious events, the percentage of patients who had to have dose reductions, percentage of patients who had to have treatment delayed, the percentage of patients who discontinued therapy. And without that information, the paper will not be considered. This is actually pretty easy to do and mandate that it in fact be done. Second, that reviewers and journal editors can request, or again, require, that such vague, unhelpful, and sometimes grossly overly positive terms such as reasonably well tolerated, based upon the actual data reported, simply be removed from the manuscript if they're there in the submitted manuscript, unless, of course, the actual data regarding toxicity justify such statements. So again, this is something that can be done at the level of the publications. And this is really quite important because remember, we are talking about regulatory agencies that review the data. We are talking about oncologists that are going to try to interpret the data for their patients. And most importantly, the impact on the patients themselves. We want to have this information to be accurate, objective, so that can be evaluated by these various parties. And finally, I would note that while it would certainly be possible to develop specific common terminology toxicity criteria associated with the changes in the way we're giving drugs, much more frequently, maybe daily, much longer periods of time, immunotherapy with very different side effects, it would certainly be very possible to have different scales used. But I would argue that the more important change, the more relevant change, the more meaningful change for our patients would be for investigators themselves, for pharmaceutical company sponsors, for regulatory agencies that have quite a bit of control in this question, demand that we include, certainly with these randomized phase 3 trials looking at comparisons of the standard of care regimen to a new regimen or modifications or combination approaches, that we demand robust patient-reported outcome surveys that directly examine the impact of specific toxic events on the patient's quality of life, not just a check the box by a research nurse or a doctor, but let the patient herself or himself express how they felt about the side effect, what impact it had on the quality of the patient's life. Clearly, much more needs to be said in this area about the evaluation of anti-neoplastic drug toxicity. But it is my hope that these several segments of Minutes with Markman will have stimulated a desire, hopefully by many, to continue this critically important discussion. And I thank you for your attention.